And anyway, this strain was out there, and this was always la-la land, kooky land. Wolfowitz, Doug Feith, a guy named Abe Schultzky was an academic who went into the Pentagon. I. Lewis Libby, we call him Scooter Libby, Steve Hadley, the new National Security Advisor, who was talking in the year 2000 about going after Saddam. I mean, before he got into the White House, he was then in private practice. Not Rumsfeld, not Cheney, not the president as far as we knew. They were in Condoleezza Rice, who's a dimwit, who's light, just, you know, very short when it comes to IQ. Perfectly nice lady, I'm sure, I guess, but very ineffective and just not as smart and as competent as everybody thinks. Maybe she is bright in a way, but she certainly was a lousy national security advisor. She was a complete internal reflection of Bush. And so was Hadley. Sadly's the exact equivalent. So, you know, there's nothing complicated about it. It's amazing government. He's got a group of people around him that put him into an unending war with horrific casualties, with disastrous consequences for most of the society that we're in war with, enormous troubles in Europe, and he promotes everybody. I mean, that tells you that, you know, everybody gets promoted who's been responsible for this war. It's amazing. It's just amazing. It's very upsetting, actually, and a little terrifying, too, because as I go on. So in early 2002, you have this internal notion by the neocons who somehow convinced Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld. Maybe they believed it all along. It's future historians are going to have to unravel this. I don't know how Bush joined in. It could be that before he got into the White House, there's some anecdotal evidence that he was talking about going after Saddam and undoing what his father did in some sort of Freudian thing, but I don't know. We just don't know. But in any case, in early 2002, he joins in. He agrees. And so here's the fight on the inside. You're pulling people away from a war that's much more important. It's the war on terror for a lot of people. It's against bin Laden, it's against Al-Qaeda, and elements in the Taliban that support them, where you're not doing well. You're pulling them away. And you're bringing them into the Middle East because you're a staging area in the Gulf, because you're going to start a war against Iraq. You're going to just worry about the problems all along. In the beginning, the fight was that these guys thought you could go into Iraq, never mind with this force that we now consider to be too weak, 138,000. They thought you could do it with 15,000 troops. They had this man, Ahmed Chalabi, telling them everybody is ready to fall. They had their own muses they were listening to. And there was a serious fight on the inside throughout 2002. The White House position essentially was 10, 15,000 troops, some special forces, a little bombing, a lot of American flags. Saddam would go. We go in, Saddam goes right away. A new government emerges, and this is in 2002. You ask the question to people, well, how, who, what new government? And they say, well, the best guess we have is these guys, Wolfowitz, etc. They watched Milosevic leave Yugoslavia, and the government stayed intact. You know, what was it called? The Velvet, what was it called, that revolution? The Velvet something. Anyway, and they possibly believed that was going to happen in Iraq. And then democracy, you see, in their world, democracy would spread. I've been saying on television and radio, as going around pimping my book in the last couple of months, I've been saying that democracy would spread like water coming out of fountains throughout Baghdad, throughout Syria, throughout Iran, throughout Saudi Arabia, occupied Lebanon. They always call it occupied Lebanon, the neocons. They don't like the Syrian influence there. And then you see, once that happened, you'd have a democratic center, Middle East, and the oil would be safe because the oil wouldn't have to be owned by American companies, but whatever international companies were there in Iran, which is the second largest holder of oil, second largest reserves in the world behind Saudi Arabia. The oil would be safe. You could get 4.5 million barrels a day, keep the price low. And Israel would be safer because in their thinking, the Palestinians would have lost their big allies in the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Iran, their allies, the Saudis. Without those backers, they would have to sue on far less qualitative or quantitative, and they'd have to want a lot less from the Israelis. It'd be much easier to get a deal. That was the vision. And this president believed in it. You can call it idealism. He believed you had to start in Iraq rather. He authorized it. And inside, in early 2002, and this is what I'm watching from inside. Inside, if you agreed that the road to ending international terrorism led to Baghdad, if you agreed with that, you were a hero and you were a genius in terms of the government, and you were rewarded. Promotions, advancements, like the people that have been rewarded in the last few weeks, just the last week. The world was yours internally, bureaucratically. If you disagreed, if you're some 3-star general or admiral working on the Joint Staff, or a senior CIA analyst, or somebody in the State Department Intelligence and Analysis Branch, and if you thought this was total whackdom, just wacky, and you told people what you thought, Iraq, are you nuts? There's no case, there's no evidence, and don't believe everybody believed there was WMD. I will tell you right now, the State Department believed there was no chemical, but the notion of nuclear weapons was widely debunked throughout many elements of the community. The State Department, absolutely, their intelligence sources said so, many in the CIA said so, many in the Department of Energy, which has a very sophisticated, they handle all of the proliferation intelligence. You've all heard of Sandia, Los Alamos, Livermore Labs. They have super secret areas that do nothing but proliferation. They all agreed no nuke. The UN inspectors, who we now know were much more competent, and they were at the time, many thought so too. They believed that. The International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, the IAEA we read so much about, they thought so too. It wasn't the idea that everybody accepted it. I'm talking about in real time in 2002, there was a great debate. But if you disagreed, if you said this is wrong, you were exercised inside. And I'm talking about early 2002. You didn't get promoted. You didn't get good reviews, you know, in the military and also in the State Department. You get little individual handwritten comments about how you behaved or whatever it is. What's the word? Evaluations, I guess. You also, if you had a peer or somebody subordinate who said what the White House wanted to say, he got promoted. He also got FaceTime. He got to go to the meetings with the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State or at Condoleezza Rice's office or what they call the Deputies Committee. They got the FaceTime. You were just left hanging. And so you don't have to go to the CIA in 2002 and 3 and 4 and say, we want you to do it this way. That's always been a misnomer, people looking for influence by the White House. The White House did it its own way. They made it very clear, very early what they wanted. And the bureaucracy is nothing but responsive. People inevitably will stop fighting and give it the way they want it, because particularly since everybody wants advancement. If you're a diplomatic person, you want to be an ambassador. If you're a colonel, you want to be a general. If you're a 1-star general, you want to be a 2-star general. This was what's going on in 2002. And to see this happen, and so this is what we all missed. Talk about bad journalism. We all missed it. I mean, you know, I got some of it in the New Yorker, but not enough of it. It didn't make any difference anyway. So the pattern was set very early. So what do you think of, so you have to understand about George Bush at this point. He is an idealist. He's going to get this done. He's a utopian. You can call him a utopian. To use a word that Wolfowitz would use, but Bush doesn't understand. He's a Trotskyite. He believes in permanent revolution. He believes that you must do this. I don't know whether God's whispering in his ear or his father's shadows whispering in his ear, but he believes in this. He believes we must have democracy in Iraq. And I was saying before the election, obviously, if he wins, he's going to bomb him to death, and he's bombing him to death. He doesn't care, you see, how many body bags come in, because that's not relevant. In his vision, his destiny is tied into the long picture, making Iraq democratic. And if we have to suffer now, and if people at the body bags to another 1,000, we're up to 1,200 already or something like that, getting above 1,100, I think, 38, as I said, in Fallujah alone. It doesn't matter. He's going to make it happen. He's going to have a democratic Iraq. And there's nothing in my book more dangerous or more terrifying than an idealist who's completely bonkers and doesn't know it. And nobody's going to tell him.